Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the outsiders shaping Gaza's future.
Outsiders are trying to decide what happens in Gaza and to Gaza at this point. Palestinians, they're not being consulted.
What it means to launch a board of peace in a genocide. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey everyone, before we go on with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode, with all of its twists and turns, and what stories you want us to do next. On your podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from and a 5-star rating while you're there. It really helps the show.
My name is Nour Odeh. I am a correspondent for Al Jazeera. Been there since the first bulletin first aired in 2006.
Incredible.
Took some time off, but I was never too far away from Al Jazeera. And I've been reporting for a big chunk of the genocidal war, from all the angles on the field, and then away from the occupied West Bank when we were not allowed to work. So it's been a journey.
Well, Noor, it is really good to have you on The Take. Thanks for being here. So we called you up to talk about Gaza, but to really understand the many twists and turns of the story we're going to talk about today, we should start at the White House.
Yeah.
U.S. President Donald Trump appears to have issued a series of invitations to world leaders to join a so-called Board of Peace. This is a committee that would, at least initially, oversee the reconstruction of Gaza. It's all part of his 20-point plan for Gaza, which the U.S. says is officially in phase 2. So take us behind the scenes here. What can you tell us about the Board of Peace?
Well, the Board of Peace looks and feels at this point a lot like the Trump presidency. It is all over the place. There was very little information known about it. But the Board of Peace is supposed to be the top layer, right? According to the plan, overseeing everything. There is a Board of Peace, and then you have an executive board who is in charge of overseeing the technical Palestinian administration body that is supposed to take care of the day-to-day things. And then there's also supposed to be an international force that is set up, headed by an American general. Now, nobody has committed to the International Stabilization Force yet. We don't know what the mandate, as far as Trump is concerned, to that force is. And those countries that have been invited to the Board of Peace are also a mixed bag.
Oh, that's a light way to put it, a mixed bag, because I want to talk about these invitations to this Board of Peace. They include some pretty unlikely figures, none of whom are Palestinian. So what do we know about who got an invitation?
More than 50 countries supposedly got the invitation for the Board of Peace. But let's take a look at who they are. So starting with Netanyahu, Israel was invited to be on the Board of Peace. Israel, a country indicted for genocide, still standing trial for genocide, headed by a prime minister who's wanted on an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court. He's been forwarded an invitation. Another character, for example, is Viktor Orban, the very problematic right-wing head of state in Hungary, but a friend of Trump. Another country is Kazakhstan, for example, because it also has good relations with Trump. There's India, there's Pakistan, there is Jordan, there's Egypt. But the bag doesn't make sense. It doesn't really give you an idea of what is expected of this. The charter that was published for this so-called peace board or Board of Peace doesn't talk about Gaza, doesn't mention Gaza by name in any of its clauses. It talks about something a lot more grand, and it does sound like it is being set up to replace the United Nations.
Wow.
And it places Trump as chairman permanently. right? He has the power to bring in countries, to kick out countries, to extend the membership of countries past the 3 years, to okay resolutions, to veto resolutions, to okay the use of money. Trump controls it all. And he's giving countries that are invited a chance for a permanent seat on this board if they pay $1 billion.
There's one name that is involved in this, a name from the past that we actually haven't talked about yet. And that is of former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. And his involvement in this is separate from the invitations that went to the world leaders, right? He is part, or would be part of, this founding executive board that also includes Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. So Tony Blair coming back again, resurfacing. What do people make of that?
Well, I mean, in the Middle East, Tony Blair is like the nightmare that just won't go away. It's the one that plays on a loop. This is a man with a long history in the region, a long history of disasters, really, and a person who does not have a lot of popularity. Tony Blair and his foundation and Jared Kushner have worked on this vision for Gaza, minus Gazans, of course, minus Gazans will, if you want. But it basically privatizes Gaza. It privatizes reconstruction. It thinks of Gaza as a piece of prime real estate.
This is that Gaza Riviera idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, they call it something else, but yes, it is the Gaza Riviera idea. They do talk about keeping the population, but then again, all throughout this genocide, we've heard everybody talking about the Palestinians, but they were never allowed a seat at the table.
Noor, there are so many jaw-dropping tidbits to the story. I want to walk them one by one. Let's start with the $1 billion, because how can I not? Yeah. So what we have heard is that to stay on this board permanently comes with a $1 billion buy-in, with money that is meant to go towards Gaza's reconstruction, ostensibly. But as you mentioned, Gaza hasn't even been mentioned in the draft charter that has been floated around.
Right.
So what are Palestinians' hopes that would actually be true? What do you make of that?
Well, look, everybody is engaging with reality, right? With this board of peace, with this technocratic government and the executive board, which is another story. It includes business people. It includes an Israeli multimillionaire real estate mogul and a Jewish American multi-billionaire known for his anti-Palestinian views, but it also doesn't include Palestinians. But there is no other choice. When the UN Security Council voted on this resolution, the US representative made it very clear. The choice is take it or we will go back to war. There was no discussion. And so the priority for Palestinians and most countries in the world is to stop the mass killing. Now, the hope is that the technocratic committee, which is Palestinian, but which doesn't really have a lot of power, it receives its money from this board of peace through the executive committee or board, and it is overseen by all these layers. They don't decide how money is spent. They don't decide those things. So they're just administrating, and they will be accountable not to the people, but to the board and to Trump personally. And if Trump is happy, they'll stay on. If Trump is not, they will not. Israel is not happy already. They don't want this technocratic committee to be formed. And they have the power on the ground to sabotage all of this. And that's another perspective, I guess, that we haven't seen play out yet. Because is Trump going to allow Netanyahu to trample all over his grand plan? And are enough countries going to go along with this board of peace? One of the articles of this draft charter, believe it or not, says that the charter is not up for discussion. It cannot be amended.
Interesting.
So
this is a take it or leave it deal.
This is a take, again, we go back to the take it or leave it deal.
Okay,
No
so
mention of Gaza, no mention of the UN Security Council, no mention of international law either, which is why the UN just a while ago had to remind the US that this board of peace, according to the UN Security Council resolution, is only mandated to deal with Gaza. It is not mandated to replace the international system that is overseen by the countries of the world.
you mentioned Israel has some objections. They have reportedly objected to some of the appointments to the board, saying they weren't coordinated. What is behind those objections? What does that really mean?
Israel was consulted. They knew of the names before they were published, so that wasn't accurate. But domestically speaking, Netanyahu couldn't not say that he was opposed and outraged, and he had to, dispatch his foreign minister to speak to Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State. Having said that, the objection at its core, as far as the Israeli government is concerned, is twofold. On the one hand, they don't want a Palestinian body, even if it were just for administration, to be in charge of Gaza, because as the Minister of Finance in Israel and the Minister of National Security put it, our goal is for people to leave Gaza, not to have another government. The other objection that Israel has is the membership of the executive board, which includes countries like Turkey, like Qatar, and others. And Israel seems to think that it can veto whoever is on this board. And the Americans, at least for now, have said, no, you cannot veto the membership. But I would caution against optimism as far as the, Americans not consulting or not really caring about Israel's veto, because what we've seen in phase one is that even though the Americans were talking about progress on the ground, the Israeli government got to do what it wanted. The implementation of phase one, the entry of aid and so on, had almost no effect. In fact, there was reporting that, the Israelis were spying on the Americans, and the Americans knew that they were being spied on. So it is all quite bizarre, but at the end of the day, what it boils down to is, on the ground, when Israel wants to sabotage something, it can, and it does, and it gets away with it.
Noor, you mentioned the fact that Palestinians do not have a seat at the table. So I want to talk about the day-to-day running of Gaza under this plan will fall to a Palestinian body, a technocratic committee led by someone named Dr. Ali Shaath. He's a Palestinian civil engineer. He gave an interview recently with Basma Radio, a local station in the occupied West Bank, and he laid out how he sees the rebuilding of Gaza unfolding.
The first phase was urgent aid. We provided them with all the necessities of life in a dignified way. The second phase is the recovery phase, which would take about 2 years or a year and a half. In this phase, they will begin to repair and rehabilitate the infrastructure and essential facilities needed to restart economic and public life for the Palestinian citizen in the Gaza Strip. And the third phase is the reconstruction and redevelopment phase.
Nour, you've been in the West Bank for a long time covering it. Who is Ali Shaath? What do you know about him? And what should we know?
Well, Dr. Ali Shaath is someone with a lot of experience within the Palestinian Authority. He was deputy minister. He's an engineer, but he also has background in work with development, right? He has a lot of access to civil society and to international donors, to countries and international organizations. So in that sense, he's quite well connected, right? But I think it's important to realize that despite all the optimism that we heard from Dr. Ali, which he needs to present to the public, the Palestinians understand that it's really not up to Dr. Ali how this goes. Because at the end of the day, all the crossings, all the material that needs to enter through those crossings are not under his control. The funding is not up to him, but whatever comes in will be controlled by a fund that will disperse the money to this administration. So there are so many limitations. Now, he has a vision of how this, rehabilitation and reconstruction can happen. And that vision makes a lot of sense. It is very methodical. It's very professional. You talk about immediate relief and then, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and then development. But in order for those things to happen, a lot of countries need to chip in. That's number one. Number two, Israel needs to withdraw, because that should happen as well in phase two. And it should open the cross. So there are so many ifs in this formula that, whether it's Dr. Ali or the other very seasoned and experienced civil society figures, they cannot promise the moon. In fact, they can promise very little. So much will ride on their success. And yet they have so little control over whether they succeed or not. Of course, they're disconnected from the PA, despite the Palestinian Authority's best efforts to find some connection, which the Americans and the Israelis rejected. And they are definitely not connected to Hamas. So they need to swim through all of those landmines. That is a lot of activity that is supposed to start happening soon. But the committee needs to enter Gaza first. So let's see if Israel allows them into the territory.
We'll have more with Noor after the break. Well, Noor, you mentioned Hamas, so let's go there, because another major piece of this plan is that the U.S. president and his envoy are openly demanding that Hamas disarm.
Right.
And they're doing it with threats. We've heard President Trump say that Hamas can do this the easy way or the hard way, even as Israel continues to bomb Gaza and remains inside the territory, as you mentioned. How has Hamas responded?
Well, Hamas has very little wiggle room at this point. Hamas accepted the ceasefire proposal. It voiced its objections to the idea of disarming. But I think everybody understands, again, that there is very little room for discussion. So the burden right now on Hamas not to do anything to give Israel an excuse is huge. So we saw Hamas welcoming the formation of this technocratic administration, even though it had no say in nominating any of the names. In fact, the names that were nominated by Palestinian factions were all shot down. The names nominated by the Palestinian president and the Palestinian government were all shut down.
So where did these names come from? Who made it on, and where did they come from?
Well, again, this is Trump's show, right? And so none of this happened because Palestinians had a say. Right? They tried, whether it's Hamas, which nobody wants to deal with in the West, or especially the Americans, or the Palestinian Authority. They tried. But at the end of the day, according to reporting, what we had was Jared Kushner talking to his friends in the region.
Right.
So this is where we are right now.
Okay, Noor, so much of this conversation will make a student of international relations heart very happy, because it's a little wonky, right? It's the ins and outs of diplomacy or lack thereof. I want to bring this back to the people, because as we know, this is phase 2 of a peace plan in which phase 1 promised a halt to the fighting, Israeli withdrawal, full humanitarian access, most of which never materialized. So it is no surprise that Al Jazeera has heard from many Palestinians in Gaza who say they are not optimistic. We've seen the videos, homes collapsing in the rain, people sheltering in tents, families trying to survive winter with almost nothing. So based on your reporting, how disconnected does this news of phase 2 and the details about the invitations and the board of peace, how disconnected are they from daily life in Gaza?
Completely disconnected. Look, in Gaza, everything is urgent, right? There are no needs that can wait at this point because everything has been destroyed. And so much of the energy that people have left is spent on surviving still. So the bombs aren't falling every few seconds as they were perhaps before October. But it is this silent war that is endless, ceaseless. There are not enough winter clothes. There are tents, but no Poles are allowed into Gaza to make sure that they don't fly with the first wind gust. The flu is going around with all its variations, and people's bodies and immune systems are too exhausted to resist. And so people have a lot of fight left in them, but it is fight for survival at this point. They hear everything that is happening. They know who's in charge of this game, of this chessboard. They understand what's at play, and that is why optimism is very difficult to come by. But at the end of the day, Palestinians aren't going anywhere. And they don't want to go anywhere else. They know there's nothing to go back to. But this is the only home they know and the only home they want to stay at. So whatever the politicians are saying right now, whatever the world powers are playing right now, with not just with Gaza, but really with the entire international system, on the ground, there is a dynamic that it will be impossible to overlook, which is people staying in their land, understanding that just by merely staying, ethnically cleansing Gaza of its population will not materialize. And in that, I think people find a little bit of comfort.
Nour, thank you so much for your expertise and your reporting on this. It's really been fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.